This is Alpine GTA, a French sports car from the 80s based on a model from the 70s with rear-mounted engine and rear-wheel drive. The aspirations of this model were high. It was supposed to fascinate in the way it drives and compete especially with Porsche models. A bold claim, but did it raise to such high hopes? Today we are going to discover the intriguing story and engineering of the Alpine GTA and explore this car near me. Because I'm Toma and you are watching Timeless Driving.
Before exploring and driving this Alpine GTA Turbo, which I found in Switzerland, we must dig a bit into the history of this model, just to understand how special this car is. Because sometimes things are just not what they seem to be at the first sight. Well, let's make that jump into history. Although Alpine was founded in 1955 by the motorsport fan Jean Redel, it started to become popular after 1962, when it presented the now renowned Alpine A110, a car with a rear-mounted engine that weighed only slightly more than 700 kilos. The founder of the French brand came with the idea of fitting simple but very competitive mechanics into a very light bodywork made of polyester. And since being light is often more important in motorsport than being powerful, it didn't take long until A110 started to establish itself in racing. That superb evolution brought fame, and it eventually brought Alpine to become the first manufacturer to win the World Rally Championship with A110 in its first year in 1973. But 2 years earlier, in 1971, Alpine launched the A310, a futuristic and visionary car that was supposed to propel the Alpine brand into a new era. The design of the A310 was at least a decade ahead of its time. It was bold and unique, and it inspired the performance of a supercar. But it didn't quite have that performance, since it became about 130 kilos heavier while remaining with a 4-cylinder rear-mounted engine tuned by Gordini that delivered less than 125 horsepower. It wasn't too bad for an 840 kilo car, but the A110 had more powerful versions, and a car for a new era was supposed to impress with an even better power-to-weight ratio. So there was a need for a more powerful engine, but that need was only fulfilled after Renault acquired Alpine in 1974. Alpine was already using many Renault parts, so the acquisition was an organic move, and further developments were also inspiring for Renault. The legendary designer Roberto Pron, who moved from Citroën to Renault, was the one to master the facelift of the A310, and it was launched in 1976. And Opron also ensured that the car would get a more powerful engine. It was a V6 engine from the PRV family that was jointly developed by Renault, Peugeot and Volvo and equipped a long list of models. Later, even Dealerine DMC-12 used a version of the same naturally aspirated V6 engine. For the A310 it delivered 150 horsepower, but the car became heavier again after the facelift with the V6 engine having an empty weight of 980 kilos. Still, the V6 engine gave the car a stronger character, and the sales tripled, from about 300-340 units per year to more than 1200 units. But then the 80s came. Alpine A310 was visionary as a design and technical concept, but it was difficult to manufacture, because its body was a single fiberglass piece that made the production slow and expensive. Besides that, any repairing on the car was costly and difficult to master, which meant an expensive insurance and an impediment for better sales. So there was a need for a successor that would be more efficient to manufacture, but would basically remain almost unchanged in its technical underpinnings. That was the role of the car we are exploring today, the Alpine GTA.
So being a deep upgrade of the A3110, the new Alpine was also the first to be built under complete Renault ownership of the Alpine company. That is why we can see also a Renault badge here.
The new GTA was launched in 1984 and was conceived to share the same design proportions, the same rear engine and rear-wheel drive layout, and even the same V6 engine. So even though it is more modern as design, it would not be a total mistake to say that a lot of the underpinnings of this car were actually developed in the 70s. The production remained at the same Alpine factory in Dieppe, but the manufacture method was very different. The body was still made from fiberglass, but the new GTA had multiple smaller pieces which added simplicity and speed in production. After all, the new model was developed in-house by Renault, benefiting from the giant manufacturer's R&D power, manufacturing expertise and build quality standards. The fiberglass body panels were now bonded to the chassis for increased strength and reduced noise, vibrations and harshness, while keeping the car light at less than 1200 kilos. The car still had its central backbone chassis, which had outriggers for side impact protection. And it was one of the most aerodynamic cars of its time, with a coefficient of only 0.28. In 1984, it debuted with the same naturally aspirated V6 with a displacement increase from 2.7 liters to 2.85, delivering 160 horsepower and 225 Nm of torque. While it was still not remarkably powerful, the car weighed only 1,150 kilos, so it was capable to reach 225 km an hour and sprint from 0 to 100 km an hour or 60 miles per hour in about 7.5 seconds. That was already Porsche 944 territory, since in those years it offered 163 horsepower and weighed slightly more. But the huge leap in performance was made in September 1985, with the launch of Alpine GTA V6 Turbo, the model we are exploring today. The new turbo model had a larger spoiler, wider tires and more space to improve cooling, which reduced its aerodynamic coefficient to 0.3. But it had a shorter stroke turbo version of the same V6 PRV engine, which had 2.5 liter now and delivered 200 horsepower. That enabled the new model to accelerate from 0 to 100 km an hour in less than 7 seconds and reach a top speed of above 240 km an hour. Weighing about 1200 kilos, the new Alpine GTI V6 Turbo was lighter and quicker than a Porsche 944, although the latter had a considerably higher price. It gained public attention and soon became a success, outpacing the sales of the naturally aspirated model and reaching a pace of about 10 cars produced per day soon after market launch.
Let us have a closer look to this V6 Turbo Alpine engine. Here it is.
Yes, this is the delicious V6 Turbo that brought the Alpine GTA to its epitome state. But in 1987 a catalyzed version was launched, with 15 fewer horsepower. This meant that the Turbo could finally be sold in Switzerland and later in other European countries when they adopted stricter legislation as well. And since the car we are exploring today was produced in 1989 and was delivered the same year to its first owner in Winterthur, Switzerland, it has a catalyzed version 185 horsepower V6 turbo engine.
Let us have a look at the Alpine GTA interior. Just look how the door opens.
This car still feels far ahead of its time by 1 decade. It felt high-tech but very ergonomic. Who said that having many buttons is confusing in a car? Just have a look at this stereo system, how superb these buttons are. There is even an equalizer for 5 frequency regions here. And these dials are so neat. By the way, this example we are exploring in Switzerland has been cherished by that first owner for more than 30 years, covering only 27,900 kilometers. The following years after it has been sold by the first owner, this Alpine added only a few hundreds more. So today, at the time of filming, it still has only 28,600 kilometers. That means I was lucky to feel this car basically as it should have been felt as a new car in the 80s.
The big moment is here. Let us start this French V6 turbo engine and listen to its acoustic performance. Surprisingly balanced sound, surprisingly modern. This is one of the coolest French cars you could have. It is very futuristic even for these days. You look at it with respect.
The manual transaxle gearbox here is a Renault UN1 that was also used on the Renault 25 and Lotus Esprit. These catalyzed models had lower gearing in the 4th and 5th gears to mask the power decrease of the engine.
All these buttons, all this technology here, it feels like a car from 10 years ago only.
This is one of the first world-shattering feelings I got when driving this Alpine GTA V6 Turbo, that this car doesn't drive as one coming from another century. It feels like a car of the present if the current cars would be made with the same passion and emotion. And I think the low mileage of this example can have a role in that astonishing feeling I have that I drive a completely new car. It is rare that we can taste a classic car not in its well-aged manner but in a conserved state of being new. And I think that is the right description of what I'm feeling now.
Yes, this Alpine was far ahead of its time. The pedals are felt wonderful. It feels like you're pushing a hydraulic system, not a mechanical thing. There is no interruption. There is linear feeling of driving this car as it helps you, not struggling with you. It has a fantastic suspension and it handles so well that you can't believe it is a car that was designed like 50 years ago and more.
It has double wishbone suspension on both front and rear axles. And its steering is unassisted, but with the engine mounted in the rear, only 37% of the car's weight is acting on the front wheels, so it didn't really need an assisted steering.
Wow! I am amazed by how well this car is controlled, how refined it is. It feels like every control has been tuned and retuned again and again until perfection. Let's push a bit this V6 turbo engine. Wow! Wow! That was unexpected. There is a turbo lag, but when it enters, it is mind-blowing.
Well, basically all turbocharged cars of this era have some turbo lag, but it was part of the fun, to feel when it enters in action.
Let's try again. Wow, wow, yes, now it's entering, yes! Turbine in action, yeah. Wow. I mean, it drives like, it leaves you without words. Wow, and again, wow. I wouldn't expect this car to drive so well, so balanced, so modern. This is a surprise for me. You know, sometimes when you drive a classic car that you know and admire on design, it may disappoint you a bit. But this is the exact opposite. I just admire this car, like respected it, but never went too much in love for it. But now, after driving it, it is a discover for me. I am deeply, deeply amazed by this Alpine. I wouldn't suspect that this car drives so well.
Wouldn't suspect that it drives so well, but it is simply superb in every possible meaning. And you know, it's not just superb comparing to what I would expect from a car from 70s or 80s. It is much more joyful to drive than 99% of the cars that are manufactured these days. And that comparison is valid even when talking about driving with precision and performance.
I just can't imagine how it felt in the 70s, having such a refined car, such a performant car back then. It was like driving an UFO, I would suspect. I mean, you could leave behind almost any car.
And you could still leave lots of them behind today, because it feels competitive and super nimble even now. It has an inherent engineering balance and precision that astonishes. Yes, partially it is thanks to the lightweight, but it is also thanks to its engine and most of all to the superb fine-tuning this model has got to have to feel so integral and nimble.
If you drive now a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, it's powerful, but sometimes it just doesn't overwhelm you. But this does, this surprises you by how dynamic it is and how fast it includes the turbo. Yeah, you see, it's a totally different car. My God, that's wow! It's been a long since I experienced so much emotion behind the wheel. I mean, the expectations were here, but the reality is like here over the top. This is definitely an underestimated collectible car. I mean, the pleasure it gives you when driving it, it's much higher than you would expect by seeing its price. I want to push it one more time. It's just too good to let it go. I'm in love with this car. Wow! I can say it for sure. Alpine is a genius car. It deserves much more attention and a much higher price than it usually has, even in this turbo version.
I think starting today I have a new model in the top 3 positions of my wish list.
Dear French engineers that have worked on this car, you have all my respect, all my thanks for this genius model. It is a hidden gem for those who want a really special car without going for the cliché options. Well, this one is probably one of the best options you can have.
Yes, a hidden gem would be probably the shortest description of this Alpine GTI V6 Turbo. And it is a gem full of intense and delicious flavor.
Also, when we drive classic cars, we always say that it has character. And by that, we usually mean that it has some inconveniences. But in this case, its character is to be absolutely ideal. That's something I wouldn't expect from it. But it is like that. It is almost an ideal car. I can't find anything wrong, anything problematic with it, anything I would struggle with. It is everything just done to perfection.
And it is such a rare quality. It is one of the most special models to have for the ones among us that want a classic car that can be driven often and far, not only be kept in a storage. And with that being said, I must also say that the first Swiss owner must have had still patience to own this Alpine GTI V6 Turbo for more than 30 years and drive it less than 1000 kilometers per year. But thanks to that attitude of him, I was able to feel this car today as a new one, as the French creators of this model originally intended it to behave and to be felt in driving. And it felt fantastic.